Well, hi, everybody. You're listening to Caregiver Crossing. We are a podcast brought to you by Joy's House. We are really happy. We're thrilled that you're here. Caregiver Crossing is a podcast that's created just for you, the caregiver. And I am Tina McIntosh.
I'm Terri Stacy, and we're here every week with experts from across the country to provide comfort and resources and a whole lot of joy to all of you, all of our caregivers. This podcast serves to embrace family caregivers of today and tomorrow. And thank you all so much for being here. Tina, jump in. Let's do it. Got a great guest.
We do. It's Rick Lauber. He is the author of 2 published caregiver guidebooks, which we know we need. He has written The Successful Caregiver's Guide and Caregiver's Guide for Canadians. He's a contributing columnist who writes about caregiving and caregiving-related issues.
Rick certainly knows a lot about the topic. He's a former co-caregiver for his aging parents, where he assumed new and unexpected responsibilities and struggled with loss and balancing his time. Advocated also for his parents, including making key life and financial decisions for his family due to Alzheimer's disease. Although very relatable to so many of you. And he also learned many joys of caregiving along the way. Rick, thank you so much for being here. Let's first talk about your role as a caregiver, because I know it's very relatable. Your mom had Parkinson's disease and leukemia, and your father had Alzheimer's disease. Talk about your experience as a caregiver.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a good place to start. As you had mentioned, I was a former co-caregiver for my aging parents. Mom, yes, had Parkinson's and leukemia. Dad had Alzheimer's disease. The role was something I wasn't prepared for or expecting, surprisingly so, because aging is a natural course of life. I jumped in with both feet. I became their banker. I paid their monthly bills. I moved them repeatedly. I shuttled them to and from doctor's appointments. I advocated for them. I eventually became Dad's joint guardian and alternate trustee. Had to make a lot of key life and financial decisions for him. Huge process. Huge learning curve. The job itself was very stressful. It was painful, even lonely at times, but it was a fantastic learning experience.
So, Rick, I know you had a lot of really precious and wonderful moments with your parents during this time. I also know that you struggled, that there were some really hard things. What is something that maybe surprised you that you had to overcome?
I think, as I mentioned, I wasn't really prepared or expecting to become a caregiver, which, like I said, is very surprising. We all age, we all decline mentally or physically, and we all eventually pass away. But so many of us are, myself included, are not ready to become a caregiver, not to assume that role, and simply are not prepared, not nearly ready as we should be.
We've talked about that a lot here on Caregiver Crossing, the fact that we're growing really old in the world now. We're around a lot longer than we used to be, and so we all become a caregiver at some point. And so I know that's a challenging question. I appreciate your honesty, because you've literally now written the book on it. Terri, I'm gonna pitch it over to you, but I know he's also contributed to some really big books too. And so go ahead, Terri.
That's okay. There's a lot of questions and about the balance you were able to find if you were holding a full-time job during all of that time. And, you mentioned isolation and loneliness. You didn't mention isolation, I did, but loneliness. And so the book itself, you've written 2 books, contributed to Chicken Soup for the Soul, written blogs, newspaper and magazine articles on the topic of caregiving. Talk about some of the lessons that maybe our listeners, our caregivers are curious about, that you learned, that you pass on to others. in the book, and also just, just in your own private personal world where you're sharing with friends about how to get through these next few days, next few years, whatever it may be?
Lessons. Wow, there's so many of them. Off the top of my head, I would think my main advice would be to prepare as much as possible. Knowing the future is impossible, is completely impossible, but I think we can all take some small steps, to become caregivers. That means, getting joint signing authority of mom or dad's bank account, looking at long-term care facilities, downsizing, a parent perhaps, communicating with family as to who's going to do what and when, preparing for emergencies. COVID-19 isn't the only emergency out there, but look at options as to what you're going to do if something happens.
Oh, I think we've frozen. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the names of the books, and I'm sure Rick will be back here in just a moment. But Rick Lauber, The Successful Caregiver's Guide and Caregiver's Guide for Canadians. And, Terri, you and I have talked about caregiving for years now. It's so good to know that there's a guide out there by somebody who's actually been through it. Oh, you're muted.
He mentioned the loneliness, and that's one of the things that I wondered. There were times when we would hear that people would keep that kind of under their hat. It wasn't something that they talked about. They would go about their business. They'd go at work. They were almost afraid to talk about it at work. And I think we've come a long way. Do you, in being able to share that information, do you think that people still kind of keep that to themselves?
That's a whole other podcast we should do, because it depends on the culture that you come from. There's been a lot of studying done that if you come from a Latin family, a Latino family, there is a lot of secrecy in care. And so, I think it depends on the culture and where you are in the world. But I certainly think that the idea of caregiving is not a secret anymore. People, it used to be, Terri, that they would say, well, I'm the daughter. Like, this is just what I'm expected to do. But you heard Rick just talk about all of the things you pick up when you're caregiving that you don't see coming. So I know we lost him. Technology has not been our friend today, but I do want to remind people that you can find his book, The Successful Caregiver's Guide and the Caregiver's Guide for Canadians, any place that you find books. And if you have any questions or want to be put in touch with him, you can email me directly at tina@joyshouse.org. So Terri, before we go and close on this segment, I know that you have had experience with caregiving over the last few years. And, I know that there are times that are hard, that we get it. There are times that are hard with anything that we do. But what's a memory you have for somebody, whether it was your family member or your neighbor or a friend? Is there anything that comes to mind for you in those moments?
Well, I've learned so much from you and doing this show, Caregiver Crossing. And, a couple of years ago, for about 7 years, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And it came to a point where now we were going to need to have that 24-hour care for her. And that is a decision. The lesson I learned there is, when you've got a lot of kids in a family, again, I'm an in-law, but when you've got a lot of kids in the family, everybody wants a job, everybody wants a role. And I remember sitting at a restaurant when the decision was made, we're going to have to put her somewhere. And I knew, in talking to you and listening to your experts and your expertise, that, you've got to figure out who's going to take the lead. Because if not, that not only is it stressful being a caregiver, but now you have the stress of this inner family turmoil that will occur. It really, either nobody wants to help or everybody wants to help. And you have to make
right. And I was going to say,
right?
You say that and you're spot on, and also give people mercy. It's not everybody's right. I think that's one thing that we all have to remember, that first of all, as Rick talked about he talks about in his book, that his sisters also stepped up with some of the caregiving. So yes. sibling dynamic alone is huge, because sibling dynamics as we get older can be wonderful and weird, on any moment. But a lot of times what we find is the personalities and relationships that were when you were 16 years old with your siblings come back, whether you're 50, you're 70 years old. So that surfaces. But I also think, sitting down and doing those roles like you so beautifully and gracefully did, and then giving somebody mercy if they can't show up and fulfill their role. It doesn't mean that they don't care or they don't want to be a part, but sometimes it's just hard for people. So, a big thanks to Rick. I'm sorry that we lost him here, but a big thanks to Rick for sharing his expertise, not just with us here in Caregiver Crossing, but also through the books. And so I see, Rick, you popped back on. I just want to say thank you for putting your experience into words so that other people can learn from you, because it helps with that isolation. We help realize we're not alone when we have somebody like you. So in closing, Rick, any words of wisdom, if I'm a new caregiver, other than being able to wrap your arms around me and tell me you'll be with me every step of the way, which I would want, anything else that you would say?
I would, my apologies about the technical problems at this end. I would say prepare. First and foremost, I would say ask for and accept help, outside help from others. You can't do the job alone. And I would say take personal respite. Look for your own activities outside of caregiving to give yourself a break.
And Rick, where can we get a hold of your books?
Easiest way to find me and find my books is through my website, www.ricklauber.com. The Successful Caregiver's Guide is available through Barnes & Noble, as well as Amazon.com. The Caregiver's Guide for Canadians is at Chapters Indigo bookstores and Amazon.ca.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick Lauber. If you have any questions or information or resources that you might need to help you through your journey of caregiving, of course, you can call Tina or talk to Tina McIntosh, the founder of Joyce House. Email her at tina@joycehouse.org. We also are so thrilled to share that Caregiver Crossing is supported by our friends at AARP. They truly are leading a revolution in the way people view and live life after 50. And we are so grateful that they've come on board to support our podcast and so much more. And we love that they're working to empower people to choose how they live as they age. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to Tina McIntosh and myself and to Caregiver Crossing. Stay well, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks very much.